Hello, my name is Diana Lindsay, and welcome to another Sunbelt Spotlight. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about a book written by Phil Pryde, and it is called San Diego, An Introduction to the Region. This book is an amazing book because it is a total reference for San Diego County. It is unique in that it covers so many topics, the history, the natural history, earth sciences, including geology, natural resources, agriculture, climate, and environment. This book will be featured on our Sunbelt Publications website. So if you care to order the book, you will find a nice discount for the book for all of your viewers here. We also encourage you to ask questions when Phil begins his talk. You'll see a chat box. Go ahead and click any questions that you have, and we'll throw them at Phil afterwards, and hopefully he can answer all of them to your satisfaction. Right now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our guest today. Phil Pryde is a professor emeritus from San Diego State University, where he taught courses in environmental history for 32 years. His specialties were water and energy resources, land planning use, environmental impact analysis. He's authored 6 books and over 100 published papers. He has been a Fulbright Research Scholar and is the recipient of National Distinguished Teaching Awards. He has lectured locally on a variety of topics, including the effects of global climate change in the San Diego area. He's also very involved in the community. He has served as the chair of the San Diego County Planning Commission, on the board of directors of the County Water Authority, and as the County Flood Control Commissioner. He currently serves on the board of directors of the San Diego River Park Foundation and the Anza Borrego Foundation. And from 1989 to 2010, he served on the board of the Joint Powers Authority for the San Diego River Park. Phil's primary avocational interest is birding, and he's taught courses on techniques of bird identification for the San Diego Audubon Society for over 25 years. He's led birding trips to numerous North American venues, from Alaska to Maine to Baja California, and has been on all 7 continents searching for those birds for his bird list. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Phil Pryde. Phil, take it away.
Thank you. Let me hit share screen here. All right, hopefully everybody can see the screen and can see a nice picture of a good portion of San Diego County there. If anybody can't see that, notify the people at Sunbelt because it looks good on my screen, and I'll assume that you can see it at this point. So thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to try and just point out some of the more important and in many cases unique things about San Diego County. When I first got here, I started driving around the county, and I was marveling almost right away at how varied and beautiful a county we actually have here. And the year I arrived was 1969. So I've been here for a little over half a century at this point. I found the county to be so intriguing that I did almost immediately start to write a book about the county as a region in its own right, with all kinds of things that make it distinctive and make it a distinctive region. And the initial goal was to have the book as a course book for a course that was available on San Diego County. But it's now in its 5th edition, and along the way, it's been transformed into more of an informational book for the general public rather than a stodgy old textbook. So it's no longer a stodgy old textbook. I think you'll find it easy reading if you were interested in it. All of the pictures that you're going to see in this slideshow are from the book itself. Most of them I took, but some were taken by other people. So in its opening chapter, the book gives a brief summary of the region's history, including the arrival of the Spaniards and the creation of the first missions, such as the first Spanish mission in the United States, which you're undoubtedly familiar with here in Mission Valley. This slide just shows the extent of the county when it was first formed in 1850. As you may know, California became a state, and also San Diego became a county in 1850 after the Mexican-American War. And as you can see in the map on the upper left there, this was how the county looked originally in 1850, and you can see it was huge and extended all the way up into the lower Sierra Nevadas. And then bit by bit, as you can see in the other pictures, other maps, it slowly got reduced down to its present size in the lower right-hand picture. Okay, so let's try this again. It's working now. The other interesting thing about the county, though, although it's much smaller than it was, it's still smaller than this, excuse me, still larger than the states of Delaware and Rhode Island combined in both land area and population. Of course, our human history begins with the Native Americans who arrived here, we think, about 14,000 years ago. There are within the county 18 reservations, and that's a distinction also because that's the most reservations in one county of any county in the United States. The many local tribes and portions of tribes within the Kumeyaay Nation, there are several sub-bands of Indians within that, but they all get together, I think at least twice a year. One of them is in Balboa Park annually for a general powwow there. And I think that's the largest celebration. I believe they do it elsewhere in the county also. The Spanish then came and settled here, started up the missions. And in 1774, the rest of California began to be explored, and that started here in San Diego with the Anza expedition in 1774. That was the first time the Spanish started heading northward to see what else was up there. And they went as far as San Francisco Bay, because I'm sure some of you know who occupied and was claiming Northern California at that time. It was our friends, the Russians, and hence the names like Russian River and so forth up there. But that expedition was interesting in many ways. The Anza expedition also was distinguished by having the first baby born to non-Indians, non-Native Americans, to be born in California, was born on that expedition. So that's another interesting little trivia fact, I guess. And then at the lower right, the railroads and the roads, of course, came much later. The map here shows the city area of San Diego and the peninsula, Coronado Peninsula, as it looked around 1872. And of course, as soon as we had, by 1872, of course, there was a railroad to San Francisco, and lots of people were pouring into California at that time because, of course, the gold rush had already occurred. And so this is what San Diego looked like. I don't have any kind of pointer that works with a slideshow, so unfortunately, I'll have to describe where things are. But at the far upper left in the picture, you can see the original name of Mission Bay was False Bay. And you can also see in the upper part of the picture that the San Diego River at that time didn't flow to the ocean, but at that time it was flowing into San Diego Bay. And that has changed back and forth naturally many times, but we didn't want it flowing into San Diego Bay because that obviously was going to be the harbor of San Diego as it is today. And we didn't want it filling up with sediment from the river. So we artificially built the flood channel that you see there roughly at that same time, so that we could get the river to continue to flow to the ocean. and not to the not into the bay. And if you stared at this picture long enough, you could see lots of other things. You can see that originally Balboa Park was called City Park, and lots of other things. What's now National City at that time was largely called the Texas Pacific Railroad land. And on it goes. You can see that what's now called North Island was in fact almost an island then, and there was a little water body extending from the bay, separating what's now the city of Coronado from what's now North Island Naval Air Station. So lots of changes over the last 140, 150 years or so. Equally unique is our very varied landscape. This little diagram may not be too obvious what it's showing here, but if you start on the left-hand side, it's just a cross-section of the county, and you start with the salt marshes, and really you start with the offshore ocean, since the earliest part of that, I think most of us would consider part of San Diego County too. And then you go into coastal sage and chaparral and up over the mountains through the oak forests and pine forests at the top, and then drop quickly down through a juniper sagebrush natural zone and then into the desert scrub area. In all, depending on how you count them, we have somewhere between 10 and 12 major distinctive natural zones in the county. And that is the most of any county in the United States. The only one that's, I think, tied with us is Los Angeles County, which basically has the same range of natural zones. Up in the mountains, there is some very distinctive, unique things. And here's one that an awful lot of people in the county don't even know exists. Possibly even some of the viewers don't, because it's very out of the way. It's hard to get to. You have to hike quite a ways to be able to see this picture that I took here many years ago, but you have to do a good hiking after where you can park your car and to even see these falls. As it notes there, they're called Mildred Falls, and they're on Ritchie Creek, which is a major sub-river to the San Diego River. It has roughly about a 300-foot drop. And that may be, I can't absolutely swear to this, so don't quote me, but I think that might be the highest waterfall in California that's not in the Sierra Nevada mountains. But I'm still trying to make sure that's a true statement if I can find that information out. If you're closer to the coast, though, you have other things to be of interest to you that you need to know about, particularly if you're a builder. For example, the soils are not real solid, and the rock underneath them is not real solid. And if you put in too steep a slope, if you happen to be building a subdivision, this can happen, and has happened many, many times, actually, throughout San Diego. You'll get some kind of movement. It may not be something just collapsing in a big crash like this one did. It sometimes just opens up an actual area of like a trench in between two portions of the landscape. So we now have very stringent laws about anybody building anything has to have a registered landscape expert go in and test the area and be sure that it is safe. So this was a 1974 Fletcher Hills landslide, and you can see that you see this actually, this area, it doesn't look like this anymore, but you see this exact same area every time you drive from San Diego to El Cajon. It will be on your left-hand side as you get to where the freeway makes a left turn and then a right turn towards El Cajon. Just before you get to that right turn going towards El Cajon, this is the hillside on your left. Don't look at it if you're driving, but if you're a passenger, you can stare at the same area. The house that's on top there, who I'm sure were quite nervous at this point in time, that house is still up there. You can see it there. Okay, the region is also famous for its wildlife, both almost any kind you want to name, mammals, birds, and so forth, but particularly birds. The birds here, I got interested in the birds here simply because there were so many of them. And the reason for that is that we're both on the Pacific Flyway, so all the migrating birds go through north and south through the county twice a year. And but also we're near Mexico, so we pick up some oddball stuff there. We're on the ocean, so we get all the ocean birds. And then go over the mountains and you're in the desert and you have a completely different set of birds there as well. So the bird life actually right now, I have 525 on the slide here. I think it's up to close to 530 different species that have been identified in San Diego County. So that is also, without any question, the most of any county in the United States. Another way that we're unique. We have more bird species than anywhere else in the US by county. In terms of minerals and so forth, of course, as you may know, I'm sure you probably all know about the gold rush, and I'm sure probably many, if not all of you, know that we used to be the leading place in the world where they mined tourmaline. And that was mostly done in a very far northern part of the county, north and east of the Fallbrook area. And we still do a little of that, but the demand for that went away in the early part of the 20th century, and other sources were found. So that's no longer a major industry in San Diego County. But we do mine a lot of things like salt. You may have seen these sort of small little hills of salt in the bay. If you've driven south on I-5 towards Tijuana, you can see these there. And we still export this salt to places like Chicago and so forth, mainly to put on the roads in the winter. Salt will help melt the ice there. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about that too much. Maybe up in the mountains occasionally. Both hard rocks, as in the left picture there, and sand and gravel that can still be found and is still being removed from Mission Valley, mainly to put in more construction there. Both of those are now probably by dollar value, probably the most remunerative mining that we do in the county these days. We don't have a lot of valuable minerals or metals to mine. Another thing we have, though, that a lot of people don't know about, is some very high quality marble and particularly other forms of granite. And some of those are so unique. We have black granite in the North County, and that's highly prized and is very expensive to use as, for among other things, as headstones in cemeteries. If you see some black marble on a headstone there, it might very well have come from North San Diego County. The hard rock mining on the left is kind of right in the middle of the city. You can see some residential houses, maybe apartments at the top there. And that's right just a little bit northeast of the Mission Gorge area where that's to be found. An even more important resource lies offshore, and that, of course, is the ocean. The commercial fishing and kelp industries that used to be, even right after, say, World War II, a very important industry in San Diego County. They're much less important in terms of their income than they used to be, but their place has been taken by recreational sailing, fishing, whale watching, and all those different kinds of things that we do today. So the harbor is still a very busy place, as I'm sure you all know. The wildlife in the ocean, though, is equally interesting. And maybe some of you have never been out to the Birch Aquarium in La Jolla. If you haven't been there, it's well worth going to. They have a very large tank there of ocean water, kelp, all these things you're looking at there was just shot through the glass of that aquarium. So, and as you may know, the little kind of orange fish right in the middle of the picture there, it looks red in the bottom picture, that's the Garibaldi, which is the state saltwater fish for the state of California. And it's found all through the state, of course. And in chapter 8, we talk about the water supplies, and the water supplies and a lot of things you see on this picture are one thing that I tried to emphasize in the book, and that is how things have changed with time. Of course, they have in the city areas, but we changed the landscape too. And here you have a picture of the lagoon at Solana Beach, and in the top, you can see a couple things that are, some are still here and some are gone. Fortunately, the sea mammals of whales, sea lions, and so forth are still with us. But on the right, gone now almost entirely are the fishing boats. We used to have dozens of fishing boats, mainly for catching tuna. And almost all of those are gone, mainly for economic reasons. Mexico and other countries figured out that they could do it more economically, or I should say that the owners of the boats figured out that they could do it more economically in Mexico and Central America. And so that's where the boats have gone to now. So you see there's still, I think, maybe a couple of the tuna boats still there, but not so many. In the lower picture, you can see the various ways that we compete to use our shoreline. A good shoreline on the Pacific Ocean, of course, is invaluable monetarily, but here in the foreground, you can see the now closed down power plant in Carlsbad there, a little bit of it. You can see the main transportation route going through there, probably on land that we have at least partially put there for it ourselves. The beach is there, of course, for recreation. And on the far side, you can see dense population there of people and houses, residential areas going down to almost to the coast. So we really make heavy use of the ocean front areas, and that's to be expected. Everybody wants to have a little piece of that, and the beaches, so all of us can get there too, and not just people who live there and or industries and so forth. We started importing water into the county right after World War II. Up until that time, we had been entirely dependent on our own internal water supplies, mostly from wells, and then into some reservoirs that already existed. But after World War II, it was clear we were not going to make it on our own water supply. And so we started importing water from the Los Angeles area, who of course were bringing it down from both Northern California and the Colorado River. This shows the La Mesa Dam, as it was originally called, built in 1895, one of the earlier dams. And they had it drawn down, as you can see. They were getting rid, I believe, of some sort of vegetation they didn't want in the bottom. And so they had it drawn way down, low enough that you could see the original 1895 dam there. And it looks in fairly good shape. It just got all covered up with water when the reservoir was raised. In the upper right, in the background, those buildings are one of the water treatment plants for San Diego County, where our water is purified and put into pipes to go to your kitchen there. So, so chapter 8 will tell you all about this. And it also describes the history of major flooding along our rivers. And as you may know, that has been an interesting story in and of itself. But a lot of people are familiar with the flood in 1916, which was the biggest one so far on record. Although we don't have any solid records, there might have been a bigger one way back in 1862, but we don't have exact figures for that. So the water history in the county, both our use of it for our own private uses and also controlling excessive water, are very interesting parts of the book as well. Oh, in the lower right picture, as you may know, just a few years ago, less than 10 years ago, we raised the dam in Lakeside, and raised it quite a bit. I didn't know originally that the amount we were raising that dam was the highest increase in the height of an existing dam that's ever been done in the United States. I didn't realize that. The amount can't tell from the picture, but the amount they're raising it there was 120 feet above an existing dam. And no existing dam had ever been raised by that amount additionally before. The agriculture in the county fascinates some people also because we have all types, and it has always been an important industry in the county right from the first days. Of course, we had to pretty much grow our own food in 1850 when people were just arriving and before there was a railroad here. But the agricultural business in the county is still in excess of $1 billion business, billion with a B, just in the county. And the flowers, of course, are one significant part of it. But actually, that's changed a whole lot too, kind of interesting. We used to grow a lot of tomatoes and strawberries and oranges. Those were some of our main crops. And all those are still grown. But today, surprisingly, if you wanted to ask what is our main crop now, I guess you could quibble over it's really a crop or not, but it is a crop. But it's plants that are grown for landscaping, both your homes and commercial landscaping, and exported elsewhere for landscaping. And so landscape plants, whatever they might be that you have in your yard, that's now the single largest agricultural industry in the county. So another way that that urbanization has changed the county. But in the process of growing, we're happy that we have made the county an interesting and modern place, but we've done a fairly good job, I think, of preserving the old history of the county. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with where some of these older buildings are, ranging from, I think one of the oldest is Casa Estudilla in Old Town, which goes back to the early, I believe, the early 19th century. And then, of course, a lot of Victorian era houses around, of which the most famous is Villa Montezuma, which may or may not, depending on what you want to believe, be haunted by the ghost of a character who lived there for a while. And of course, a lot of them are in Heritage Park. I'm sure probably all of you have at one time or another gone there to see the very interesting houses that have been largely moved there and become a very interesting little study on the history of housing in the county. The middle picture on the bottom, in the middle there, is along the Victorian buildings at 5th and F Street. And those, I believe, are the oldest commercial buildings still in the county. I don't have down there, I believe they were built in 1888 or somewhere around there. I'd have to check on that. And then, of course, a little more recent, the California Tower in Balboa Park is also a very interesting building architecturally. And a lot of people who come to California stay, and if they come to San Diego, they're even more apt to stay here because downtown San Diego, I think, is one of the nicest cities anywhere in the United States. It's well kept up. It has not super old buildings. A lot of cities have older buildings, of course, but the whole area, and particularly the areas around it, have been very well maintained. And I think part of that's just the way we've divided up the city into a great many little individual communities there, which you can see on that map below. And I'm sure most of you can quickly pick out which one you live in. And all those little areas seem to, they have a history of their own, and people who live in those areas are very proud of their history there, and particularly the more better known ones like Little Italy, for example, and Barrio Logan at the top, and other coastal areas like Mission Beach, all the beaches, Mission Beach, and all the way down to Imperial Beach and so forth. All these have their own little identities. And that makes people keep them up, and they just become very nice areas to live in. And so I think that's one thing we've done really well in San Diego. But of course, the suburban cities, I realize the North County cities never want to be called suburbs of San Diego. So I have to say San Diego, it's immediate suburbs and North County as well, all have their own history as well, and are also very interesting. And of course, by far the Hotel del Coronado, or as we like to call it, just the Hotel Del, is almost world famous, certainly nationally famous. Almost every president, I don't think 100% of them, but almost every president, since it was built in 1885, I believe, have visited there at least for a short visit. That's how well known and famous it is. And yes, it's supposed to be haunted too. So I'll let you, I guess if you want to, you can rent the room that's supposed to be haunted. I have not tried that myself, but if people are adventuresome and want to find out if it's really haunted, I think they'll rent it to you. The bottom right picture is some very old houses that are not nearly as well known, but have been very well kept up, including the Frank Kimball House, which is even older, going back to 1868. And of course, we have buildings from the Spanish and Mexican periods prior to San Diego becoming a city and a county as well, that have still been preserved too. So the county, I think, is very interesting in that regard. And then the county also talks about the backcountry of the county, meaning anywhere that's not an incorporated city. And a good portion of the county, the majority of the county is in that category. But that's where some really interesting things come to play. And I'll just mention a few of them. Of course, Julian is well known for the gold rush in the 1870s through the 1890s. But a lot of the original buildings are still there along the main street, as is the original hotel that was built there, which I stayed in. It's a beautiful hotel. If you just want to do something to spend a weekend there or celebrate an anniversary or something like that, I certainly highly recommend spending a weekend at the Hotel Julian there, if you haven't done so. And then hopefully all of you have been to Borrego Springs and seen the interesting iron sculpture work there by remember the man's name, Ricardo Braceda. Can remember his first name, Ricardo. Ricardo Braceda did these, and they're very lifelike. He just made them all out of steel and metal that he could form into the animals, and they have become very famous too. And people that go to Borrego just to see those, so that's well worth a trip there. And they used to have the sign that you can see for Jacumba Hot Springs, and it was a very famous hot springs nationally. All kinds of famous people stayed there until the main hotel burned down. And after that, it kind of went into disarray a bit and is no longer active as a major hot springs anymore. The hot springs is still there. I understand that there is thought of trying to restore it. I don't know if that will come about or not. Today, it's just a small, very small community that's there. And Rancho Santa Fe, of course, is famous for all kinds of things, but all the big eucalyptus trees that are there were brought in and planted there. And of course, we need to take other things into account locally also. We're certainly not unique in the potential for wildfires, but we have a lot of areas that will burn, very large fires, of course, in the backcountry, and they have burned right into the city, not the one you're looking at. That was a fire in Del Cerro, I think about right around the turn of the century. I forget the exact year. Oh, it says there, 1997. And it just burned down to Lake Murray in the foreground and then stopped, of course. But the bigger fires, of course, burned into parts of the city itself, like Rancho Penasquitos and Rancho Bernardo. And they have the potential to do a lot of damage. So we have to constantly not only be on the alert, but right now we're taking into account, right, the city is considering it, has it on its desk right now to maybe change some of the zoning laws to give more credence to the fact that we need to take into account the fire potential because we are set up to where we could have a very serious fire that could burn well into the city before it got put out. So that's something that we know about, but we're going to concern ourselves about. And of course, another thing that we have to worry about is the future of the county. And one of the things in the future of the county is the what we're going to do for electricity. And as I'm sure you probably all know, we are putting an emphasis on both solar and wind energy as non-polluting and renewable sources of energy. The photovoltaic cells that you see in the main picture there are along I-8. You may have noticed them. You can see them as you drive through Alpine on the right-hand side of the freeway if you're going eastbound. And they're fine. They're being put up everywhere. I'm sure probably many of you have them on top of your house. I do, and if your roof is big enough, they can take care of a good portion, and in some cases, almost all of your personal electrical needs for your house. The wind towers, I would like to note, are a little bit more controversial because, and here I'll just give you my personal opinion as someone whose job when he was teaching at San Diego State, but I did teach on the effects of these things. And there is a problem with bird migration and just birds in the region hitting the blades of the windmills, which usually, unfortunately, will kill them. And I just have the feeling, I'm not saying that's a huge problem, and I'm certainly not saying it's no problem. I'm just saying I don't think it's been studied enough to really understand it, because predators come along during the night and take away dead birds that might have been killed during the night, let's say. So if you go there in the next morning, you don't see anything dead. If you've hiked in the woods or backcountry a lot, you don't see dead birds. And the reason is that they're picked up by both other birds and mammals that find them a nice breakfast. So they keep the area clear. And for that and other reasons, I just think we need to do more study on the effect of windmills, even these big ones, especially the big ones, on bird life. But that's a whole nother story. So we'll continue on here. The increased use of both solar and power, I mentioned that we're building those to get rid of fossil fuel use for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that fossil fuels do produce a lot of smog. And this is how San Diego looked in the 1970s. When I first got here in 1969, this was not uncommon, what you see in the upper left there, and you may be able to identify where that's from. It's looking from the top of Mount Helix, kind of, what direction are we looking there? Sort of westward, I guess. And the mountain poking its head out of the smog is Coles Mountain, that maybe some of you have climbed. And you can see that up to, I'm gonna guess, until about 11,000, give me 1,100 feet on Coles Mountain, you were in the smog layer. And then it would suddenly go away due to atmospheric temperature inversions would keep areas above that cleaner. But fortunately, we don't see this anymore. We've cleaned up our cars, and getting rid of fossil fuels will help a lot more. We actually, of course, use far fewer fossil fuels in other places. As you may know, it's illegal to burn coal in California. And that's been true for a long time. They just said, you're not going to burn any coal for any reason within the whole state anymore. And eventually they'd like to get rid of certainly the use of oil and if possible natural gas as well. That will be a little harder, but we may be able to do it. The picture in the upper right is kind of amazing. You may think that that's just, I don't know what you think it is, at Mesa Dam, but as it says there, it's non-biodegradable detergent suds. You have to be probably as ancient as I am to remember using kitchen washing suds that were not biodegradable. Now they all are, of course. But this is what it looked like in 1961 in a photo by another geography professor, Lauren Post. So that fortunately has been cleaned up, although occasionally you can still see suds coming from somewhere. I don't know where they're coming from now. I have seen them though, both at Mesa Dam and elsewhere, but not in the quantity you're seeing in this 1961 picture though. Hopefully that is gone kind of forever. We've also done, I feel, a nice job of creating preserved areas throughout the county in large numbers and large areas to protect our natural environment. And I certainly applaud that, in part simply because it's a good thing to do anywhere, but also because we do have all these natural zones, and the natural zones have all kinds of animals, birds, mammals, reptiles, you name it, that need a place where they can maintain their populations and not be pushed aside, in some cases, maybe forever, by urbanization. And we do have, unfortunately, a fairly good number of endangered species still in the county. The good news is that in most cases, they're not decreasing to the point where we're worried about any of them imminently becoming extinct. But the not so good news is they're also not, except in a few cases, they're starting to expand in numbers, but a lot of them are not expanding. We're just sort of holding the line with them. But anyway, I just showed you some pictures of areas that we have preserved. And if any of you have been part of that effort to preserve these areas, that's a very good thing to have done, and I applaud you for that. Well, we're almost done, and at that point, we'll be into questions and answers. But just a couple more. One thing that this particular book, San Diego, An Introduction to the Region, is, and I named it the region and not San Diego, An Introduction to the County, because I also wanted to say a little bit about some of the other things in the immediate vicinity. And so this book has a goodly chapter at the end. The last chapter is on our nearby neighbors, the people who live in Tijuana and the rest of northern Baja California, of course. And as you know, that city, I think it's actually larger in size now in population than San Diego is by a small amount. The two cities combined, just within the city limits of the two cities, have over 3 million people now. This picture I took before the border was quite as sealed off as it is now. I couldn't take this picture today, but this is sitting on a hillside actually in Mexico with a couple of people that have hiked up there from Tijuana. And I probably took this picture, yeah, it says in 1980, the year 1980. If there was any fence there at all, it wasn't a continuous fence, and it was easy enough to climb up the hill here south of the bottom part of San Diego. And you can easily tell where the border is between the agricultural areas of San Diego on the left and the heavily urbanized area of Tijuana on the right. And that border, of course, just goes in a very straight line all the way till you get to the Colorado River in Arizona. So they are our neighbors. We are right beside each other. The two cities actually touch each other, of course, with the international boundary in between them. And another distinction, another unique thing we could end with about San Diego is there is nowhere else in the entire planet Earth, literally on any continent, where you will find two cities as large as San Diego and Tijuana immediately right next to each other with an international border in between. That does not occur anywhere else in the world. There may be some small cities, of course. There are a lot of other smaller cities right along our border with Mexico. But actually, if you think about it, even in Canada, I think in Detroit's the only place where you have a large city and then not quite so large a city on the other side. So that's kind of unique too, to have two major metropolitan areas in two different countries right beside each other. So I'm sure probably everybody has been to Tijuana for one reason or another. But one thing to keep in mind is that this is a tremendous economic importance to both countries to be right next to each other. And just to show you how important it is to the United States, the Chamber of Commerce, of course, keeps track of such things. And they have determined that the amount of money that Mexicans spend in the United States compared to the amount of money that we spend in Tijuana when we go down there and buy whatever we buy, it's a 10-to-1 ratio. The Mexicans are spending 10 times as much money in the United States as we spend in Tijuana. And so you can see the tremendous importance there. And of course, as we all know, there's an awful lot of the people who live in Tijuana who have jobs in the United States. So the economic integrating of the two cities and two countries there is maybe unprecedented elsewhere in the world too, just to how much the two cities depend on one another. And this is probably a good thing. I just call your attention to the picture in the upper left. This picture was taken some time ago. I don't have the year there, but I'm going to guess probably in the 1970s, maybe, or 80s. And that was the original fence. Of course, it's much bigger now. At that time, it was possible for people to occasionally, Mexicans to come across the border. We let them in to visit their relatives who would come down to the border and meet with them. And they couldn't go any further than just on the other side of the border. But we don't do that anymore. Of course, the fence is bigger and the effort is greater right now to not have anybody crossing the border if possible. But I thought this picture was interesting. It was taken by another professor in the geography department, Barbara Frederick, and her emphasis was Latin America. And so she went to Tijuana frequently. And this is kind of interesting because it may be the only picture you're going to see of what the fence, or at least the original fence, looked like to people who lived in Tijuana. This is what they had to look like. And of course, I guess if they had their druthers, they wouldn't have a fence there at all, but it was there. So a view that you probably won't see too many other places of what the fence looks like from the Mexican side. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Phil, very much for this. And for those folks that are watching again, Phil's book is being discounted. If you care to buy a copy of it, just go to our website. And if you have friends that miss this, have them check back in a couple of days on our Facebook page. This is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again or direct other folks to watch it. We do have some questions for you, Phil. One quick question here. What are the most significant changes you have noted since writing this book in 1976?
Well, that's a good question. I suppose the obvious answer is just the rapid expanse of the whole metropolitan developed area further to the east and particularly further to the north. But if I can be allowed to go back just a few years earlier than that, I remember very clearly coming down, well, wait a minute, this would have been before that. The first time I ever came to San Diego was to visit a friend who I'd been in the Army with in Germany. And he invited me to his house, and he happened to live in San Diego. And that would have been in the 1960s, probably early 1960s. And I remember so clearly at that time, I was driving down from Northern California, and I went through Riverside, and I was on, at that time, there was no I-15. It was still old State Route 395, I think it was. And I remember driving down there and leaving Riverside. And I left the city of Riverside, and I never saw one single house until I dropped down into a deep canyon, and there were some houses on the other side of that deep canyon. And that deep canyon, of course, was Mission Valley. And I had never seen, I did not see a single house at that time in between. There was no Rancho Bernardo or anything in between. And so that just shows you just how much the region has just expanded in all directions. I'm trying to think if there's anything unique or hugely different that pops into my mind. Nothing is popping in, I guess.
There's a question that kind of ties into that. It says, can you talk about the population history of San Diego? At what time was it first counted among the largest cities in the US?
Well, that's a good question. And I guess that depends on how you define the most populous cities. But the question's a very good one because its growth has not occurred all at once. Its first growth period was the boom in the 1890s, I think, was a big boom decade. And it grew quite a bit then. But even by the big World's Fair that we held in 1915, there was only, the population of San Diego City was only 37,000 people. And I am absolutely amazed at the people who were the big people in the city at that time, that they could put on that big and successful a show that people came to from all over the country, including President Roosevelt, the first President Roosevelt. They did a magnificent job on that World's Fair for only 37,000 people in the city. Then Los Angeles was growing very big then too, and continued to through the 20s. Then of course, nothing grew very rapidly. People just weren't moving during the Great Depression, and nobody moved anywhere during World War II because you couldn't buy gas. And then of course, the place started booming again in the late 1940s. And that's when we had to start importing water. And during World War II, though, the city of San Diego only had about 300,000 people. So we were not one of the bigger, all the big Eastern cities were much bigger still then. But we started booming after the war. And then it slowed down a little in the 50s, I'm not quite sure why. And the next really big boom was at the end of the 1970s and into the 1980s. And that's when we passed first 500,000 people, probably in the 70s. We passed 1 million. And guess where you can find out exactly what year, because I don't remember. It's in the book. The book also has a chronology of all the major things. So if you want to see when San Diego reached 1 million, that's in the chronology. But I'm going to say that it was probably in the late 80s sometime. So that's when we became one of the major cities. Today, there's around 10 cities of over 1 million in the country. And so we joined that group when we first got 1 million people in the probably the late 1980s, I'm gonna say. And we've grown up now to where the city has about 1.4 million, I think, something like that. And the county has well over 3 million people within the county. And then it slowed down again after the big boom in the late 1980s, 1990s. Then it slowed down again. It hasn't grown as fast in the current century, and that's blamed on it's too costly to live in California. I'm not sure that's the whole reason. It may be for some people. Certainly, the cost of housing is, I would call it a problem. People are just not building. They could build cheaper houses. They don't have to build $1 million houses, which is what you're pretty much doing now. They could build cheaper houses, but they don't want to because you don't make as much profit that way if you're a builder. So I'm just saying, I think there's more than one reason why the population growth has slowed down quite a bit and still is. Still is growing slower than it used to. So we'll see. Right now, we have almost exactly the same population as 2 or 3 other cities, including Dallas and Phoenix and San Antonio, are all just about the same population we are. So it's hard to know exactly where we rank. It's somewhere, I think, around 7th or 8th biggest, but I think we're growing faster than, let's say, Dallas is. So we may be creeping up towards the 7th largest again. I don't know. Well, that's a lengthy answer to your question. So let's go to another question.
Thank you, Phil. Somebody has actually 2 questions. They want to know, do you have a couple of favorite escapes in the county you'd like to share? And then long-term, what are your primary concerns for the region?
Well, I tell you, I have kind of fallen in love with this county so much that I can go almost anywhere and I'll love it. But I gotta say, I love the desert. And I think Diana mentioned that I'm on the board of the Anza-Borrego Foundation, whose job it is to be the, let's call it the civilian assistant to the state park system, which of course runs Anza-Borrego State Park. But the Anza-Borrego Foundation is the one actually that takes care of a lot of the visitors and the bookstore and everything there. And so I love the desert. A lot of people think the desert has nothing into it. To me, the desert has everything in it. If you were to ask what my personal motto is, I would paraphrase, I think it was Will Rogers, who was famous for saying he never met a man he didn't like. You may have heard that. Well, my motto is a slight adaptation of that. I would say, I've never met a landscape I didn't like. And I love the desert landscape, but I love the mountains also. And there, of course, there are little individual things that are great to see. So many of those I wouldn't even want to start even trying to name where they are. But I just love to hike around and drive around the backcountry. And there are interesting things to see almost anywhere you go. So I'll sort of just think that question a bit and move on to the second one. And remind me again what the second question was.
Yeah, what are your main concerns about the region?
Oh, that's an excellent question. What are the main concerns? As I've mentioned, we've done a pretty good job of preserving it. And right now, I'd say there isn't really a whole lot of large undeveloped areas in the county that are developable. There are some large undeveloped areas that aren't in parks and so forth, but a lot of them say are too steep or too rocky to turn into a big subdivision. So a lot of the county has been built up. And so the question is, where do we go from here? You combine that fact with the fact that the builders are still just building $1 million houses. And one problem is just finding places that people can live that isn't going to make them broke for the rest of their life trying to pay it off. The price of apartments and condos are pretty high. Apartment prices are going up too. They're still livable. You can afford maybe to buy them if you have a job, but they're going up also. So I think that's just finding a place for more people to live. And that really raises the question of everybody's always happy because more people are moving in, more people are moving in. Well, there is such a thing as being overcrowded and having too many people trying to live in a city. And there's no limit to how many people you can try and live in cities. But New York City, I would not want to live in New York City simply because how crowded it is. And their population is pretty well leveled off at around 8 million. So sooner or later, you reach a point where you're not going to add more people, even if you want to. And I think that's a topic that needs to be discussed. We have most other things under control. Our water and air are quite livable. We have lots of parks, and we're gaining additional ones constantly, and so forth. So I think San Diego really is one of the livable, most livable cities in the country. But yeah, I think we're at the point where we have to seriously consider, okay, we've crowded in 3 million people. Do we want 4? Is that okay? Do we want 5? Do we want 6? Do we want 7? You know, where does it stop? And does it stop because things are starting to deteriorate? That's certainly not the reason we would want growth to stop, because people just don't want to live here anymore. So this is, I don't have any ready answers, but I just think it's something that needs to be thought about and talked about more than it is. Is there some limit to how big we want to grow?
Why was the Julian gold rush decades later than the more well-known gold rush of 1849? How much gold was actually found?
Well, I'm going to start sounding bad here because that's all in the book. And I don't remember all the numbers. But the short answer is, well, a lot less here. And it was, our gold rush occurred later simply because it obviously occurred when the gold was discovered. And the gold that was initially found near Julian was simply discovered, about 30 years after the gold in Northern California was discovered. And there was a lot more up there. Our gold supply was not real great. And the book points out that the reason for that is that our mountains are all cracked. The rocks have been cracked and displaced and so forth. So if you found a nice gold vein in Julian, you might be able to, well, dig gold, dig gold, dig gold for about maybe a couple 100 feet, and then quack, I just stopped because the whole rock structure had split and shifted and your vein was somewhere else. And so that's one of the main reasons it's got too expensive there's still gold up there, but it's just gotten too expensive to try and get it out, because you just have to, and you don't know where the end of that vein is. You kind of dig around until you find it again. So those are quick answers to that question.
Here's a question, since you are a climate change expert and you taught that at San Diego State, what are the effects of climate change on natural resources that we can see over time? So what are those effects that we currently see?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I'll deny being an expert because I hate that. I don't think anybody's as much of an expert on anything as they think they are, but I do know the answers to those questions. And gee, I just heard my clock bong 11. That's a question I could spend an hour on, and to get it down to 1 minute, I just got to tell you what I think is the most important thing. It's not temperature change. Both us and the birds experience far more temperature than the average. We experienced more temperature change this morning than they're predicting overall. It's not that, it's the effects of the temperature change. And the greatest effect of temperature change, even a small amount of temperature change by far, are the oceans. And the people who really study the potential for climate change, I talked to several of them and they all agree on that point. The thing we most need to worry about are the oceans. Because if the oceans go, and by go, I mean the temperature gets so high that we're making major changes in the various life forms and in the ocean. It's not just that we're going to have fewer fish to eat. If you lose even one layer of the various types of fish and everything in the ocean, it affects all the other layers of fish and mammals and so forth, both above and below them. And the things that can happen bad in the ocean are just terrible. And the ocean, it's not just the ocean temperature, it's the ocean salinity. People are going to be affected by ocean salinity and all kinds of other things. And that's what people are really worried about. And the oceans affect the precipitation. Precipitation is really of more concern because the things that are now, areas that are now dry are expected to get drier, and areas that are wet are expected to get wetter. And both of those are bad, of course, particularly as regards agriculture. So those are things I worry about. So don't worry about just the temperature rising, but what that temperature will do to precipitation, and even more importantly to the oceans. And so that's the best quick answer I can give to you.
Yeah, and isn't there something happening to the kelp forest? Aren't we concerned about what's happening in our own ocean kelp forest?
Well, yeah, we're certainly worried about what's happening, and things are happening to the kelp forest, but that's a long story, and it's not just climate change. The kelp have been going up and down. There are things that occur in the ocean naturally that will eat the kelp from the bottom. We used to harvest it a lot, and that made it go away, but we don't do that so much anymore. And we do have very strict requirements as to how much kelp can be taken out. But so that's not a big concern with the kelp right now. But there is big concern about other things, and that is the movement of fish. One thing I've learned with my interest in birds is that we know for a fact that birds have changed their feeding habits in the ocean because the ocean temperature is changing. I'm sure you've heard that in the last few years, we're getting much warmer water in about August off of La Jolla and Scripps Institute, who measure it carefully also. And that change in water temperature has meant that a lot of the fish that used to be close to shore have gone out into deeper water if they wanted cooler water. And that means, for example, that birds, including endangered species like least terns, now have to fly much further out into the ocean to find fish to bring back for their young. And that means they can make fewer trips a day, which means they can feed the young less. And so instead of raising 2 young a year, they may only raise 1. And a lot of those, of course, are not going to make it to adulthood. So it's having a real effect on the birds and the fish life in the ocean as well. And we're finding dead birds along the shore. Sometimes find a dozen dead birds, and they will autopsy those, if that's the right word, in their stomach to see if they can figure out what happened. And so far, in every case, the birds have starved to death. In other words, they're not finding food in the ocean that they used to find. So these are, and again, that does go right back to my saying, yeah, I'm worried about the oceans, but anything that happens to the ocean is going to affect a lot of other things.
Well, Phil, thank you so much. We do have other questions, but I think we really have run out of time. I'm sorry we can't answer more of them, but I want to thank everybody for attending this Sunbelt Spotlight. And I do want to remind you of some others that we have coming up. For those of you that are interested in the county and hiking, and as a field guide, the Coast to Cactus book, Jim Barnell and myself will be talking to the California Native Plants Society tomorrow at 7. And if you'd like to join in on that talk, just go to the California Native Plants Society San Diego chapter and click on that to reserve a space. On Saturday, Anza-Borrego Desert Natural History Association is sponsoring a talk with our basket book authors, Jean Miriam and Alan Garfinkel Gold. And if you're interested in joining that, go to the Anza-Borrego Desert Natural History Association website and click on that to join. On May 6th, we have another Sunbelt Spotlight. We're going to be featuring another birder, Wendy Esterly, and she's actually going to be talking as part of Celebrate Migratory Bird Day, and she'll be talking about our book, Coloring Birds, Southern California. And she's a great birder, has wonderful photos, and she's so interesting to listen to. So please join us on that Spotlight on May 6th. And once again, just want to remind you that this book is available and discounted on our website. And Phil, again, thank you so much for such a really interesting talk and bringing up all these concerns about our county and where we're headed. And probably one last question is, what can we do? What can we do as individuals to kind of help the county? Got any ideas?
Well, yeah, the main thing, of course, unfortunately, it usually always comes down to politics, but just I always try and make sure that when I'm trying to decide who to vote for, and if you're curious, my political affiliation is no political preference or no party preference. So I like to vote for anybody I think is going to be a good person in office, and but study what they believe in and what they're going to do when they get to passing new legislation and so forth, and try and make sure that they are taking care of all the things that we need to take care of, keeping the area clean, preserving things that need to be preserved, and all that. I guess the short answer would just be active politically and make your voice heard, that you do expect the elected officials to keep the city and the other cities and the county and the backcountry and everything as nice as it is now. And then you'll be doing the best thing I think you can do to keep us liking San Diego.
Great. Thank you so much again. And thanks again for joining it. And come again and to another Sunbelt Spotlight. And thank you and have a great day.
Thank you all for coming.